You're now live, Councillor Walsh.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Greater Manchester Housing, Planning and Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee. The agenda has been circulated, but item 1, apologies. I have no note of any apologies. Are there any that haven't been picked up, Joanne?
None to report, Councillor Walsh.
Thank you very much indeed. I will in summary remind members of protocols for video conferencing. If you could turn off microphones unless you're speaking, please, that'd be very helpful. Declaration of interest. Any declaration of interest on any items on the agenda? Previously declared. Thank you. And then to item 5, minutes of the last meeting, which was held on the 10th of September. These have been circulated. Members happy that they're a correct record? I see nods and take that as assent. Thank you very much indeed. We come on to the,
just one comment. On the minutes, there's one error. Councillor Brockton from Trafford. We've got Councillor August down as Trafford representative, and she's Salford.
Well noted, Kevin.
We'll amend that, Councillor Walsh. Thank you. We'll amend that in the minutes.
Thank you for that. Other than that, members happy with the minutes? Thank you. Right, item 5, therefore, is the GM Brownfield Housing Fund, tranche 1 spend. And we have, again, as a guest at this meeting, Paul Dennett, who will introduce the item. The floor is yours, Paul.
Thank you very much, Chair, and also thanks to members of the Planning, Housing and Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee for inviting me to talk about some positive news really in Greater Manchester. So colleagues have obviously received the update and the paper before the committee today in connection with Greater Manchester's Brownfield Housing Fund. What we'll be discussing today is obviously tranche 1, because we are working on a second tranche for the housing fund, and we're currently working up some criteria to agree with leaders across the 10 local authorities in terms of how we move forward on that. The report before colleagues is obviously to note the combined authorities grant allocation made direct from obviously the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, and also to note the approach set out as to the process and the criteria that we've applied to identify sites across Greater Manchester under tranche 1. And obviously the early year spend, as you'll see from the profile in the paper, the 16.2 million in this financial year, obviously is a challenge for the entire system to get that money out the door, and obviously the work underway. Just by way of a bit of context, I think it's important to acknowledge really, obviously we've been trying for some time to negotiate with central government, obviously funding to enable us here in Greater Manchester to get on with our brownfield preference approach to development within the city region. And colleagues will probably know back in 2017 we thought we'd agreed a housing deal with the government at that time for £68 million, 50 million on brownfield fund, 10.25 I think for Collyhurst, and there was some revenue funding there in terms of 8 million. You'll be very familiar with what happened. Government encouraged us to deliver beyond local housing need and deliver something like 227,000 homes over a 20-year period. Obviously the revised plan for jobs, homes and the environment was not delivering that number for government, and as a consequence of that, that housing deal ultimately didn't come to Greater Manchester, which was tragic, because arguably we could have been getting on with some of this probably a few years ago now. You will be familiar that the Prime Minister addressed the nation on the 30th of June with his Build, Build, Build speech. And obviously in there was a lot of information about obviously the future affordable homes programme, the government's First Homes initiative, and importantly, for the purposes of this paper, there was reference to the 400 million Brownfield Land Fund. And obviously government have used a criteria for allocating that, and Greater Manchester I'm pleased to inform the committee, has received £81.1 million through this tranche of funding to enable us to get on with that brownfield preference approach that we've been articulating for many years now in our policy around jobs, homes and the environment. You'll see that this money is profiled over a 5-year financial period. You'll also note that it is in many respects front-loaded, so there are some challenges certainly over the next couple of financial years to demonstrate to government that Greater Manchester can deliver on brownfield preference to meet obviously housing need within the city region. Government have their own criteria within this, so it's not simply giving the city region money or the combined authority money to do with what we want. Government want to see us deliver at least 5,500 homes through this brownfield funding. Ideally, government would like to see us deliver 7,500 homes. All homes need to be on site by the end of this Parliament. So that's obviously a significant challenge for us all across the 10 local authorities in Greater Manchester. And also government aren't prepared for us to allocate anything above 15,000 per home as an average across how we allocate this funding. You'll also note, and this is an important point in the paper, there's an allocation of 1.94 million in revenue, because colleagues I'm sure will appreciate that to get this money out the door, to do all the necessary work in terms of viability and assessments and deliverability assessments, it does require a lot of work for us to enable that. So there's a 1.94 million allocation of revenue for our delivery team within the city region, which again is good news. So obviously great that we've received this money, given that we've been trying to lobby and campaign for this sort of money for quite a long period of time now. And obviously what we've been doing within the 10 local authorities is working on how we prioritise how this money is allocated across Greater Manchester. And we've agreed a criteria that looks at deliverability, which I'm sure you'll see that's one of government's primary drivers in all of this, value for money, and also strategic fit as well. And we've weighted those different criteria, 50% on deliverability, 30% on value for money, and 20% on strategic fit. And obviously, given the deliverability challenges, it's really important that, you know, there's ownership and planning in place, or certainly in the process of becoming in place, that there's a developer and contractor in place. And obviously, we've had dialogue with all the 10 local authorities and your directors of place around what your priorities are within the districts. Off the back of applying that methodology, what we know from Tranche 1 is 24 sites across Greater Manchester have been agreed. Most local authorities are beneficiaries from this. We'll be allocating 21.442 million. That is obviously slightly above the 16.2 million allocation in the first financial year, so we're going to have to cash flow some of this. And the reason for doing that is because obviously we want to retain all of the money. We don't want to be returning any of this back to government to enable us to deliver on brownfield preference. We're also delivering 4,318 units in this tranche 1, which is a great achievement when you actually reflect that government are asking us overall over the whole programme to only deliver 5,500 homes. So thank you to all the local authorities for all your hard work in getting that number up to 4,318 units in that first tranche. The average grant allocation you'll see from the report is 10,519. So this is really good news for us. Obviously what we're on with as well at the moment is working on this second tranche and also agreeing a place-based assessment criteria across Greater Manchester to prioritise how we get the rest of the money out the door into the local authorities across Greater Manchester to deliver on our brownfield preference. And colleagues will know, in terms of the draft plan for jobs, home and the environment that we've consulted on last time, 83% of land supply for housing is being met on brownfield land. So again, it's helping with us get some of that underway, and you know, thanks that this has actually manifested itself now at this point in time. Obviously, I'm acutely aware from previous consultations on our plan for jobs, homes and the environment, you know, some of the stuff that was being shared with me was concerns around infrastructure, and here we are now. We've got £81.1 million worth of brownfield land fund to actually spend. And colleagues will know as well, we were successful with the 54 million of shovel ready money as well in the city region, again for infrastructure purposes. So good news all in all. I have to just say though, moving forward, we'll need a lot more of this brownfield money from government, given the ongoing viability challenges we face within Greater Manchester because of property values and land values. You know, the market here in Greater Manchester is very different to probably what it is in London and the south of the country. And those deliverability and viability challenges continue to play out in terms of contributions to affordable housing, contributions to Section 106. Obviously, all of that is protected by the National Planning Policy Framework, which was changed, as we know, back in 2012 to introduce the deliverability tests and the viability tests that we all grapple with in our local councils at the moment. So obviously the report is here for recommending to you. I think it's good news for Greater Manchester. What we need to do now is prove to government we can deliver if we're going to get our hands on more of this brownfield money, in my opinion. Thank you. The viability test that we all grapple with in our... I had an echo there.
Yes, someone had their microphone on. If you could turn it off, please, it's helpful. Councillor Proctor, was yours a comment on this item? Was it on the minutes?
It was on the minutes, so Chair.
I assumed that to be, but I just wanted to double check. Thank you. Councillor Billington.
Yes, my question is to Paul. Is there any idea yet of what the allocation of funding will be split between the boroughs of Greater Manchester?
So the allocation won't be split as such between the boroughs of Greater Manchester. It'll all be around the criteria that we agree collectively and then how schemes are brought forward. So I guess my point back to you would be it's incumbent upon districts to come forward with schemes that meet the criteria that government want to deliver, that we've collectively agreed in Greater Manchester, to then get access to brownfield funding moving forward. So I can't tell you, you know, precisely whether or not, you know, local authorities will get access to some of the money moving forward. It's all in your hands in terms of meeting those criteria. As we say, 24 schemes so far have been agreed in this first tranche. All local authorities, bar one, I think, in Greater Manchester are beneficiaries of this first tranche. Again, that's working to the government's criteria as set down in the report, and also the Greater Manchester criteria that we've agreed around deliverability and the other items that I highlighted in terms of the criteria.
Okay, the 24 schemes, they're not listed in the report?
Yeah, they're not listed in the report, absolutely. I mean, if you've got an interest in your own local authority, by all means, ask your local authority and they can tell you whether they've been successful and what the scheme is. I'm sure they're happy to do that. But I mean, if colleagues are wanting to see details of all of the schemes, then, you know, I can make that request of officers to bring that back to the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Paul. It's very helpful. I have to say I agree with Councillor Billington. Seeing a list of all the sites would be very helpful. My question was about our Mayoral Development Corporation in Stockport, and I just wondered if you could possibly give any more detail about how this links up with that, which is obviously a brownfield redevelopment site of major importance to us in Stockport. So any extra detail for us would be a great help. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Obviously, brownfield preference is all about town centre regeneration, town centre revival. So the point made there is really well made. Colleagues will be aware that one of the priorities for us is to try and increase housing density within our town centres to obviously improve the, if you like, overall economic viability of how retail and life and functions really. It's not just about retail, it's also about leisure, it's about culture. So absolutely, I see the brownfield housing funders being critical to the regeneration of town centres. But I have to say this doesn't stand alone. I mean, government have lots of other initiatives as well that they've announced recently, such as the Town Centre Funds initiative. There's marginal viability funds, there's the Housing Infrastructure Fund money, so there's the Affordable Housing Programme, which is a £12 billion programme. So just to look at the Brownfield Fund in isolation, if we're thinking about town centre regeneration or the Mayoral Development Corporation in Stockport, I think is limited. I think we need to look at all funding pots when we're doing town centre regeneration. But, you know, providing that the MDC or Stockport local authority meet the criteria that government have set and that we've agreed as a combined authority, I should see no reason whatsoever why the MDC and what we're trying to achieve in Stockport couldn't be a beneficiary of the Brownfield Housing Fund. Absolutely not. But again, it's incumbent upon Stockport local authority to come forward with those proposals to meet the criteria set by government and by the combined authority that we collectively agree to actually access some of this money. So in a sense, the ball's in Stockport's and the MDC's court to actually access some of this fund. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor August, please.
Thanks, Chair. Hi, Paul. So I was just wondering, I saw from the report on this that was published on the 21st of July that there's been a series of assessments done, so climate change assessment, risk assessments, legal and all that. But I can't see that there's been an equalities assessment done. I feel like it's probably not something that's been overlooked, but I wondered if you could double check to see that it has been done and if we could possibly share it. And then the second point I had was on point 3.2. It says assurances have been provided that planning consent will not be an issue. I just wondered who had provided those assurances, whether it was the prospective developers or local authorities, and just how we can have assurances given that you know, for some of them there are no planning applications that have been accepted, and how we can know that it's not going to be an issue. It states that they'll be underwriting the grants to make sure things have happened within 2 years and it's achieved by the end date. But I just wondered how close can we get to that end date before we have the chance to recycle that money into alternative schemes or lose that money?
Yeah, no, thanks very much for both those questions, Councillor August. I will chase up on the equalities assessment. Yeah, I will chase on that for sure and see whether or not that's been undertaken with regards to these grant allocations. I have to say, not every single decision of the combined authority triggers an equalities assessment because of the fact that it won't actually have an impact necessarily on equalities. Maybe how the money is spent by the districts once the money is allocated is a different matter, but all we're doing here is actually allocating money to schemes, to districts to get on with schemes in their areas. The getting on with the scheme, I think, is probably the area where we want to properly understand what is the equalities assessment here, what is the social impact, how are we creating jobs and opportunities for people, how are we targeting the Black, Asian, minority, ethnic communities within our local authorities. But absolutely happy to take that away and come back to you on that. In terms of the planning permission question, I think it's a really good point that you've made there, and I've raised this myself. Obviously, what we're receiving at the moment from interactions with the districts is strong reassurances that the schemes that have been agreed and brought forward, the 24 schemes in the report, are deliverable, and they've agreed to, if you like, underwrite that deliverability over obviously that 2-year period in terms of cash flowing this if planning permission isn't granted until then. So we are monitoring this effectively, and that's the reassurance I would give to you. And obviously I want to know if these schemes are not going to happen, then we need to be getting that cash recycled and back out to local authorities in Greater Manchester as quick as we possibly can. But as I say, the districts that have put forward these schemes, the process that's been gone through with officers of the combined authority, I think is quite robust. And I'll be holding those individuals to account to make sure that they deliver on the commitments that they've given to me and they've given to the combined authority, that these schemes are deliverable within the requirements as set out in the report. If that doesn't happen, then we will be considering obviously the recycling of those funds, and I'll be updating colleagues through the combined authority on that. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hayes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. and thank you for the report. It was very positive. But my question is, are you able to specify which council hasn't been able to submit any sites? If you want to, if you don't want to, say so. But and then what are the general issues in respect of them not being able to submit any sites? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it would be useful, Chair, for an officer to respond to this. And I'm not sure if he's on the call, but I did ask for Andrew McIntosh to join the meeting. Ah, he is on the call. There we go. Andrew, would you be able to give details on this? Because I'm mindful now this is the second time it's cropped up around the schemes, and obviously colleagues not having access to that information.
Yeah, no, of course. I think in terms of why the authority couldn't bring a scheme forward, it's simply to do with the timescales of the expenditure, and that the district didn't want to put in an application for a scheme without confidence that it could deliver within the timeframes within which we needed to expend the cash. So the point that Paul's made a couple of times, which is that the government set the rules around when we spend the funding, and the district wasn't in a position to be able to meet those deadlines and therefore didn't submit. I mean, the authority was Bury, and they took the decision not to put in an application on the basis that it would be unfair if they didn't believe that it was deliverable, but very much working with them for the tranche 2 funding when they're bringing forward schemes that will most likely be eligible for the funding from the next tranche.
Thank you. Councillor Garrido, please.
Hello, Paul. Thank you very much for your report. I am a guest here this evening, so if I ask a question it's actually been dealt with in the past, perhaps you'll forgive me. I'm a great believer, right, that scrutiny does not note. Scrutiny looks at things and they scrutinise what the executive is doing, and we don't note things. We either act on them or we accept it. But I don't. I'm a great believer in not noting things, so I'm sorry about that. But it's regarding this list that we don't have. I find it quite difficult to talk about something that, to be quite honest, I don't know where they are. I don't know. We have no list whatsoever, and I think that should have been part of the report. And I think it's a bit lax that it isn't there, because in Salford I wouldn't expect it. I would expect the list to be actually given to members so that they can scrutinise it and so they can ask questions about it, because all the members that are here actually represent areas and they may have had questions on that particular brownfield site. But I'm delighted that the government is actually giving this money to actually help out, and I was delighted to hear that there is actually other money as well to help, because what normally happens is we have these schemes and then we don't have the money to carry them through. So I'm quite pleased that officers will have the money to do the work on them and that the infrastructure will be looked at. So I'm disappointed, if I can say that, but other members might have seen the list, but I haven't seen the list. So that's my only my question today. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, thanks, Chair. I just in response to Councillor Garrido, obviously this has been through the combined authority, and colleagues have agreed to allocate the funds across the 24 schemes. So, you know, as a consequence of where we're at in terms of this decision, it is coming to the Scrutiny Committee for you to note it, because this isn't about us actually informing a decision to be taken. It's about us actually sharing with you the information on the fact that we've got access to the funds from government and we've been successful, and also decisions have been taken with regards to allocations across Greater Manchester. I do accept the point Councillor Garrido is making around language, and maybe we can go away and look at that by all means. But I think it's important for us to acknowledge and accept that, you know, the decision around allocations for tranche 1 have actually been taken. So that's the important point.
Thank you.
With regards to making this known to members of the committee, because as has been rightly highlighted on a number of occasions now, the actual list of the 24 schemes is not appended to the report.
Thank you very much. Councillor Billington.
Yes, just to ask, considering that Andrew is on the meeting, does he have a list there with him now which he could discuss with members of these 24 sites?
I think I would prefer to see a note of that, a written list sent out to us, and we can discuss them at the next meeting rather than trying to do it ad hoc. It's slightly difficult to go through a list of 24 sites and assimilate all of them. If we're going to do justice to it and proper scrutiny, then I think we need to see it at for the next meeting, before the next meeting. I'm sure that can be arranged, Andrew.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mandy Shilton-Godwin, please.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I would just like to back up the point that Councillor Garrido made. Actually, I was really surprised not to see those details as part of the scrutiny, and I realise that the decision's made, but it did all feel a bit nebulous and a bit odd reading the report, and a little bit kind of hard to really get your head around without actually knowing what was being proposed and where they were. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Walker, please.
Yes, just on this issue, that when I see the amount that's got to be spent this year for these sorts of projects, unless they were actually in progress or virtually ready for progress, it'd be extremely hard to make this spend. And I'm very, very conscious of that. And I'm just concerned that, and I presume we have, but you made the point that we've got an overspend, a deliberate overspend to take up that slack. But I'd like to think that we've got other stuff just behind that as well, because I think it's going to be incredibly hard to get that spend in this first year. So I presume it's Andrew that'll be able to reassure us on that rather than Paul. But you know, that it would be helpful, because you know the time scale on this. I mean, we're pretty late in the day. I mean, to be fair, this has been around since July, so it's not quite as horrendous as it looks. But even so, to have, you know, those schemes it's going to be an incredible effort. So just reassure me that we've got backup to make sure that, because I presume that money's lost if we don't get it spent.
Yeah, if I can come in and respond. I think there's a pipeline of about £150 million worth of projects that we've been compiling that's vying for some of this funding, and that was almost a sort of, if you like, the list of projects that each of the districts were aware of that could come forward in a shortish number of years. And actually the work that we've been doing is to scrutinise the deliverability of each of the schemes so that we do get to a robust list of projects that are capable of expenditure within the time frame. So there's been an awful lot of time and effort spent at speaking with the districts, determining exactly where they are with plans to get on site, and actually the process has reduced the schemes that were originally put forward on the basis that following scrutiny they couldn't then be delivered, and the £21 million worth of expenditure is as a result of that process. But the whole point of the over programming is that we're all aware that you start working on a brownfield site and you can come across unknown. So, you know, a 30% overspend might very well seem excessive, but it's because we are worried about the fact that projects will come across issues that they were unaware of when the submission went in, and which we won't know until they start doing the work. So we've done as much as we can to scrutinise them, to give ourselves assurances that they will be delivered on time. And I think if I may respond on the.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask Andrew. Obviously, this has been to Greater Manchester leaders, but my understanding is we will be making this public, won't we, in terms of the scheme? So it will actually go formally to the combined authority for ratification and sign off all those schemes. So this will become public information, won't it?
Yeah, if I can respond on the why there was no list attached, I think the intention of the scrutiny process was to scrutinise the process that we actually use to select the schemes, so not to get into a scrutiny of each individual underlying schemes, knowing that actually it's a prioritisation process. So the list wasn't appended for that reason, which may have been incorrect, but that was the rationale, and certainly with the time period before the list goes public to go to the CA meeting at the end of the month, the other slight nervousness was we continue to do due diligence on the schemes that we want to approve, and actually, you know, there might be a small chance that one or two of those still fall out as a result of further due diligence, and clearly publishing the list earlier than we need to would show public commitment to a scheme that actually we might, for whatever reason, find out is undeliverable at the point we need to publish for the CA meeting.
So
thank you very much indeed for that.
Can I follow on on that
Very,
point?
very quick point, Councillor Walker, please.
Because I completely I mean, Wigan is full of brownfield sites, so you know, we know that you always hit snags that slow things down, and so I'm particular, and this is about the process that I want to understand now, because clearly if you need to add something to that list, so I'm talking particularly in this first year of spend, so that we make sure we spend all that that's available to us. I know you've over provisioned, but even with that over provision, I would like to be assured that it can be added to without it having to go back through scrutiny and the combined authority. I'd hate that sort of process to mean that we lose out on some of the money because of the hiccups that can happen. So can you just reassure me about that?
Yeah, I can definitely provide you assurances that we're doing as much as we can. And as Paul mentioned in the paper, we've been allocated revenue funding to support the acceleration of brownfield sites. So actually we are currently working with the sites out with the ones that have been allocated this first tranche of funding to accelerate them as fast as we can. And part of that process will be trying to get them on site as quickly as possible, with the expectation that the next tranche of funding is actually started to be awarded over the course of the next couple of months as well, so that we've got already another wave coming forward. Because I think while the government allows us, if we don't spend the money from government, then we lose it. That doesn't prevent us spending the money faster, because within the organisation there will be ways and means of cash flowing the early expenditure. Because actually, from an objective perspective, what we want to do is accelerate the schemes as quickly as possible, and that the intention is to accelerate the next tranche of, or next wave of schemes, and then cash flow them should we need to. But that hopefully provides you the assurance that we're pushing everything behind it as fast as we can.
That's spot on. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Chair, can I just add as well? I think it's really important that the districts also appreciate their role in this, because You know, we've only got a small development team within the combined authority. It's absolutely critical that the districts work with us in a timely manner to ensure that these schemes, you know, get the green light and we get the money out the door so we can get on site and start delivering this. The deliverability of all of this is the real challenge. And, you know, although leaders have considered obviously the criteria and what we're prioritising ultimately within Greater Manchester, we will be bringing a report to the CA to make it fully public exactly what these 24 schemes are that are obviously mentioned in the report before you. But the priority for me is about getting that money out the door, getting the schemes on site so we can demonstrate back to government our commitment to deliverability to hopefully get access to more money in the near future. But I must say I'm really impressed with what Andrew and the team have done. They've worked their socks off to actually turn all of this around in breakneck speed in many respects to actually deliver on our brownfield preference strategy. So real credit to all the team. But I accept some of the points around obviously scrutiny today and us not having the list before you. But those schemes will be made public, and I don't want colleagues to think that somehow we're withholding that information. It's just about some of the practicalities of where we're at with the districts and those schemes mean that it's difficult at this point in time, but they will be going to the combined authority, so they will be in the public domain.
Chair?
Thank you. I'm going to take Councillor Robinson, who's not as indicated, and then finally Councillor Billington.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to play devil's advocate now. What happens if an authority runs out of brownfield sites?
That's a really good question. I certainly know from the last draft plan that 83%, I think it was, of our housing need was being met on brownfield land. There is clearly a real challenge to deliver our economic aspirations as a city region, and also our housing need as according to the government's local housing need methodology solely on brownfield land. There's no doubt about that. Those challenges are there in the evidence base for everyone to see. So, you know, this is not new news for Greater Manchester. We're all absolutely clear that brownfield is a huge challenge for us, and it's a challenge for us because of not just having the land available, but the actual viability and deliverability assessments associated with the brownfield land. And, you know, I have to be honest, if it wasn't for, you know, funding coming forward from central government, you've got to ask yourselves the question, would we be getting some of these sites away for development purposes within Greater Manchester? We think they are deliverable, but there is always a real challenge here from a deliverability, viability assessment. And as I've already highlighted, a lot of this harks back to what happened in 2012 with the introduction of the National Planning Policy Framework and obviously the deliverability and viability criteria, which, as we know, if you read, I think it's paragraph 173 of that document, it talks about, you know, the need to make sure that the landowners and the developers have a reasonable profit, whatever that may be. People often talk about 20%, and then for schemes on top of that, you know, how do we deliver affordable housing? How do we contribute to Section 106? You know, all of this is a huge challenge because of the policy framework within which we find ourselves. So again, when we're talking about brownfield land, the remediation costs are thrown into the mix, the assembly costs are thrown into the mix, the additional infrastructure costs associated with that are potentially thrown into those viability assessment mixes. So huge challenges. And, you know, that's why earlier I paid credit to Andrew and the team, because these are not easy things. These are very complex things in line with the government's national planning policy framework. So good question. Thank you, colleague.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to take a final comment, a brief comment from Councillor Billington, please. You're muted, Councillor Billington.
Paul, you said it's up to councils to act timely on this. And is there any issues with current councils at the moment which aren't cooperating with this funding? I do know that this ties in with the Getting Building Fund, which was one of the previous GMCA meetings. And I watched that back where you gave the presentation on the reports. and there was nothing on there for Tameside. And not once did the council leader, Brenda Warrington, question you on that. And I think that's why there is so much anxiety around members to have more transparency about this list of 24 sites, because there's a number of boroughs which didn't get any money either. And I'm sure they'll be looking at, well, perhaps we'll benefit more from the brownfield fund instead. And that's my point on that. But when can we expect this list for members, please, and what councils aren't cooperating right now?
Yeah, so I think Andrew's probably best placed to answer what councils aren't cooperating. But what I will say, Councillor Billington, is none have been raised with me by officers of the combined authority. So as far as I'm concerned, all councils engaged with the Brownfield Housing Fund are fully engaged with the combined authority and fully engaged with the process. So nothing's been raised with me. And obviously, Andrew's already indicated the only local authority that aren't going to be a beneficiary of this first tranche of Brownfield Housing Fund is Bury. So just to reassure you, Councillor Billington, Tameside clearly will be getting some allocations from the Brownfield Housing Fund. And obviously those schemes will be made public when we publish the papers for the next combined authority. I don't know of the exact date when that will be. I don't know if Andrew can probably share with us when the papers will be published for the CA, which will detail the 24 schemes.
22nd of October.
Yeah, 22nd of October, Chair. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, so 22nd of October. Obviously, the 24 allocations will be in the public domain for members of the public and yourselves also to see. And, you know, if you've got any questions about any of those schemes and you want to ask us further questions, we're more than happy to come back to the Scrutiny Committee. As I say, this is just an issue of timing, I feel, in terms of what we can put into the public domain at this point in time. But Andrew, do you want to reply in terms of whether or not we've got any issues of engagement from any local authorities? I'm certainly not aware of any.
There's no issues in terms of engagement. The officer groups are all very engaged in the process. I think that there's an underlying challenge with the stage of development of schemes within each local authority. So it's not a lack of brownfield sites. There's maybe in some areas less well developed proposals, and that's where we are working with each of the districts to ensure that there's schemes coming forward. So we're definitely seeing schemes coming forward in all districts, and putting in some extra resource from the CA perspective to help bring forward schemes where there's maybe less capacity at a district level to do so.
Andrew, which authorities have proposals currently?
Which authorities have?
All authorities apart from Bury. Yeah, I've already confirmed that.
No, he said that, yes, so Bury haven't been really cooperative in their approach, but what I'm saying is, Andrew was just saying that there's some authorities with weak proposals. So I just want to know which authorities have got weak proposals for their bids for the Brownfield Fund, because Tameside clearly didn't have strong proposals for the Get Britain Building Fund, where a number of authorities got money, including Manchester, got a significant chunk of that. I don't think it's really needed in Manchester. Manchester's well developed. It needs to go to the satellite boroughs, but that was GMCA's decision apparently.
Can I, on the Getting Building Fund, that was a set of criteria imposed on us by government.
Very briefly, please.
Yeah, it was a set of criteria imposed on us by government that resulted in a prioritisation list. So it was to meet their criteria upon which then they decided which schemes got funded. So it wasn't a specific CA decision on the Getting Building Fund. And in terms of it's not weak proposals. It's just that there is some more development work that needs to be undertaken before they can actually start on site. So there's lots of strong proposals and strong strategic cases for doing schemes, but they just need more development work before we can get them on site.
Okay. Thank you very much. Members are asked to note the allocation under the Brownfield Housing Fund and also to note the approach as set out in terms of process and the criteria applied for identifying sites on tranche 1, bearing in mind that tranche 2 will be coming and there will be similar arrangements.
Noted,
Happy to.
Noted, Chair.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Need to set from that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, fine.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Andrew, for a robust presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Take care, colleagues. Bye-bye.
We come now to item 6, the Green Summit 2020 Diversity Review. Mark Atherton is to present this. Do you have a paper?
It's Sarah Mellor standing in for Mark Atherton today.
Sorry, Sarah. Apologies.
No, it's perfectly fine. Yeah, I'd just like to, obviously, we've been requested to come to the committee to discuss diversity of the Green Summit. It's fair to say that we was looking to have a one-day live event which changed at relatively short notice to a 4-day virtual event. That meant that the way in which the Green Summit was previously done wasn't the case this time. We requested content from stakeholders. So in terms of sort of having full control of that diversity agenda, we was given video clips and so forth, and a lot of those clips actually do show a lot of the diversity within Greater Manchester. But however, I do take members' point that when you look at the live panels and keynote speakers, we're definitely short of diversity. I'd like to say it's not the first time the environment sector as a whole isn't very diverse, and it's something which we are conscious of, and we're really trying to do something about that. So one of the things which we did in recognition of this is we have set up sort of small talking head clips which are sort of on TikTok and social media, really to sort of promote environmental jobs to people of all backgrounds, to try and get involved in environment more. But happy to take any questions. You know, I say I'm here today totally recognising the fact we did relatively well gender balance on those key speakers and live panels, but recognise that in diversity terms we didn't reflect what is Greater Manchester. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much.
Through you, Chair.
Councillor Shilton Godwin's got a question, Chair.
Right,
I
thank
can't
you.
get to the chat room.
Right, I'll take Councillor Mandy Shilton Godwin first, and I'll take you, Councillor Robinson.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you for that report, Sarah, and thank you to Mark as well for doing that at quite short notice. It was me that asked for it, and the reason that I asked for it was because it caused absolute consternation amongst Manchester councillors, and so I felt that it was my responsibility to bring it here on behalf of Manchester councillors. I do accept the point that you're making about the real need to encourage more diversity in that particular sector, but I also think that it's a matter of real urgency, because I think it's really unhelpful, given that we're in a climate emergency and given the lack of biodiversity, that affects all of us, and we really need to be reflecting that. I think it's part of our responsibility as a combined authority to show that diversity there and to provide role models for people, and so therefore it seems to me it's really incumbent on the combined authority to go the extra mile and find people. As regards to gender balance, yes, Sarah, I kind of take the point, but actually somebody who used to organise a lot of conferences as part of my working life, I also noticed that the most senior speakers and the kind of people that have got the biggest platform and the biggest photos were the white blokes, and and women tended to be more as part of panels or in groups. And so I think that we need to be very mindful of that. And I wouldn't like to see this happen again. Thanks.
Yeah, I fully take on board what you say. I suppose we're in that situation where I don't disagree. You know, if I look at the waste contract, the CEO of Suez is male. We try to attract, you know, the people in prominent positions within that sector, and in doing so, sorry, my dog's barking. In doing so, that obviously represents currently what the environment sector has, you know. So I can also say that in particular in the live things, right way through from Monday to Thursday, those sessions were changing. We were having people send replacements. So whilst we set off trying to really have good, strong gender balance, that changed as well throughout the day, both positively and negative in different panels as it went along. But yeah, totally agree, and more which we can do in order to get more prominent, you know, both in ethnicity and within gender balance. We're really hoping that the Talking Heads promotion, which we're going to do, really starts to stimulate that kind of promotion to get that balance going again.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Robinson, then Councillor August, and then Councillor Gibson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Talking about diversity, you need to also look at people with disabilities, people hard of hearing. You need that cross-gender as well. And how many elderly people have you got on that? How many young people have been part of these panels? And how many people have you invited to come on these panels? Because I wasn't aware of it. And I'm also the lead on homelessness and housing, which also affects how we build houses in the future because of the eco-climate that we need. So there's lots of people that I don't think have actually been invited. And you're right, it has been the top class white collar people, and it does need to be far more diverse than it is at the moment. So I'd like some information on how many people were part of this that had disabilities and age groups, please, as well. Thank you.
You're muted.
You're on mute, Sarah. We can hear you now, Sarah. Oh no, you've gone back on mute.
You're still on mute, Sarah. Okay.
Sorry.
We can hear you now.
Can you?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Right, it's still showing as on mute. Yeah, we've got over 40 hours of material which came through stakeholders. So doing that analysis would be quite difficult to do. What I would say is that the event was organised in collaboration with the Youth Combined Authority, and they were invited to sit on all panels. Now, clearly, when we set off doing this, the timing changed, so it meant that, you know, most of the students who were in were back at school. So we did try where possible to have young people actually on those live panels. But due to timetable changes, I know on my SCP one, we had a young person right way up until the day, and then the timetable changed and she had to go in and she couldn't get permission to come out. So we did try, but I do recognise everything which you say. Obviously the event met accessibility, so we had everything where possible, subtitled to encourage people, so that everybody could actually be part of the event, but totally recognise it's something which we need to do. You know, diversity covers every walk of life, from, you know, what working class families to thing, and we need to make sure that it's representative of Greater Manchester, and more than happy to work with members to make sure that next year's event we've got all that covered.
Thank you. Councillor August, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think the event going ahead as normal, if you will, was fantastic. I was slightly disappointed when I read this report, though. It felt a little bit like you were sort of blaming the Youth Combined Authority for their involvement as to why there was a lack of diversity. And I agree with Councillor Robinson before that, you say diversity, you do need to think of it in terms of all diversity. We're talking about LGBTQ people, elderly people, homeless people, veterans, all sorts of people. If you're talking specifically about ethnicity, you need to say ethnicity rather than diversity, if that's what you mean, because certain sectors that I've just mentioned are well represented in the environment industry and certain sectors aren't. I would say then, who was actually in charge of this? Who signed this off? Who signed off decisions? It says here that there was an open invitation to partners, to agencies, and that they sort of just put forward people, and that this was all the sort of the Youth Combined Authority's idea. There must have been officers involved, and I would have hoped that there would have been leaders at the Combined Authority who had signed this off as well at their briefings, and if not, I'd wonder why. I'd also sort of like to look at this on a wider level. The recommendation for the report is quite disappointing, if I'm honest. We'll work to continue to seek inspirational environmental ambassadors. I think that's just a nonsense. It's not a real target. It's not a real commitment to do anything. I'm really pleased when you said you're doing the TikTok things and the talking heads and trying to encourage people to come forward. That's one step. I would say as well for next year, not just to seek out people, but to specifically say to these companies, you don't have an open invitation. Give us your best in terms of people from this community. Be open. If you want to achieve equality and diversity in your panels, you need to actually say that and say we're seeking women from your company. We've decided that we want people from the LGBTQ community from your company. And I'd also wonder about any sort of unconscious bias at the GMCA. I want to know if perhaps any of you have undergone unconscious bias training, because this does seem to have completely slipped your radar, if I'm honest. I'm acutely aware that I'm the only BAME person on this panel today, and I wondered if we do have any statistics on the diversity of the GMCA itself. And if we don't have it, I'd request that that's brought to this panel, because if you don't have diversity in your workforce, then you're not going to have diversity in the things you do, and especially if you haven't had unconscious bias training. So I think this report is poor, and I think it needs a lot of improvement, frankly.
Thank you. Respond to that, Sarah, please.
In terms of what process it went through, I would hold my hands up. I was lead officer in running this event. Yes, it did go to various different bodies, but the programme kept changing often as these things happen. And the material which we had, it was a different event, so it wasn't a live event where we had control of everything which happened. The idea of the Green Summit was to showcase the great work which has been going on in Greater Manchester. I think it did achieve that. Yes, it may not have got where we wanted in terms of diversity, and it is diversity which we're talking about, and we hold our hands up to that. We're in no way saying, and I don't think, in fairness, I don't think the report is blaming the Youth Combined Authority. It's done in conjunction with that. It was very much led by the CA, with the theme working with the Combined Authority to cover areas which they actually were interested in, and we tried to do that covering 4 days, which has never been done before. And we've had excellent feedback from a number of, across the board, both internationally, on what we've tried to achieve. In terms of diversity within the CA, I'm not best placed. I sit within the environment team, but we'll definitely, I'm sure Julie will take that back as a question raised. But yeah, I'm sorry if you're disappointed by the report, but I don't think there's anything more that we can do than hold his hands up and say, we're as disappointed probably, but we've not managed to get diversity across and how diverse Greater Manchester is. But we do have 40 hours of great, showcase of actually what we are doing in order to meet the climate change emergency and show the work which is going on in that area.
Thank you very much. I've got a note from Julie Connor that the authority can break down the sort of statistics and data that members have been asking. Let's take Councillor Billington as the final speaker on this one, please. Councillor Billington.
I just wanted to say a lot of what I was going to say was on what Councillor August said, and I think what she said was very thorough, and I think that was an excellent contribution to the panel. I do think that targets should be met, and there should have been targets published with this rather than an open-ended summary. What I would like to say is was the Green Summit in particular, did it have a high attention of people who were looking to join the event on the basis of GMSF, and what are the demographics in those areas where GMSF is targeting, and was it reflective of the demographics for the Green Summit as well?
It did. We haven't had any of the analytics back as yet. That's still being studied. What I can say is we had over 5,000 people going and viewing what was on there, and 10,000. GMFS wasn't mentioned within the Green Summit at all. So it would be hard to reflect. I mean, we can give you sort of area if that is given to us. But yeah, we can provide, as soon as we have the analysis of the makeup of what that is, then we can provide members with that.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. We have the report before us. Comments been made that it should not just be here for noting, but what are members' wishes on this one, please?
Chair, can I say it's only a very short report as well. It just covers two A4 sheets of paper. I would have thought that we'd have had a more in-depth report. So can we have in the future a more in-depth report rather than maybe 1.5 pages of dialogue on a piece of paper? If this was coming to my council, I would be saying the same thing. I would want a fuller report. Thank you, Chair.
I think this report was dealing with the issue of the diversity. I think the greater report about the substance of the conference would be helpful. I think that is a separate issue entirely. I think we disaggregate those two aspects. But in terms of report on diversity, members have made fairly robust comments. Members happy, therefore, to note those comments on the report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, for that presentation. We move then to item 7, the Transport Strategy 2040. Simon Warburton is going to deal with this one, please.
Thank you, Chair. So we've included a short report in the papers today that is the first of 2 reports that we'd anticipate bringing to the committee, if you so wish. This report sets out the forward process now for the completion of the review of the 5-year delivery plan that mentioned previous members will hopefully recall that we had.
You're breaking up very badly at the moment.
I'm sorry, I should come closer to my machine. We've had a 2040 transport strategy in place since early 2017, and that has given us a policy base for developing specific transport initiatives in partnership with our colleagues in the 10 local authorities. That led us to the publication of a draft delivery plan in early 2019, which was further articulated then through the Mayor's Our Network Vision last summer. And the approach that we've taken has already been successful in helping us to secure the levels of funding that we have seen Greater Manchester secure through the Transforming Cities Fund, and has also helped us to work with colleagues in the Department for Transport to bring forward the proposals for 5-year local transport funding settlements, which were suggested in the budget early this year, with Greater Manchester identified as a pilot for that process. What we have now done in concert with the work to review the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework is to undertake a review, particularly of the deliverables within the 5-year delivery plan. And I'm just going to hand over to my colleague, Nicola Kane, whose microphone is hopefully working better than mine, who's just going to talk through a few slides that just bring to life a little bit more of the content in the report.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Chair. Good evening. I'm just going to take you, just through the main highlights really of the documents, and as Simon says, we will be happy to come back with more detail in due course. There are 3 main parts of the documentation that we'll be taking to the Combined Authority for approval. The first, as Simon has said, is what we're calling a light touch refresh of the 2040 strategy. And that this is the main part of our statutory local transport plan. It sets out that long-term transport policy framework, and it's really focused around delivering this vision of world-class connections that support long-term sustainable economic growth and access to opportunity for all. And we've looked to bring that up to date really. Things sometimes seem to move quite slowly in transport, but actually an awful lot has happened over the last 3 years. So we felt it was important that that document reflected the latest position on things like the Mayor's speech on our network, our vision for a sort of London-style integrated transport system, our ambition for 50% of all trips to be by walking, cycling and public transport by 2040. Our ambitions about active travel in particular, and obviously there's been a lot of work done on this in the last 3 years around following up on the Commissioner's report Made to Move, the development of the B network ambitions, and an awful lot of development around our environmental agenda, so declaration of a climate emergency and our ambition to be carbon neutral by 2038, the Clean Air Plan. So I won't go through that long list, but an awful lot's moved on. So we're just making sure that document reflects that current context. And then we've got the 5-year transport delivery plan. So this is the other part of the local transport plan, which needs to set out that long-term policy framework and the nearer term deliverables that we're looking to bring forward over this 5 years. And as Simon said, this has very much been developed to align and support GMSF and responds to the feedback we had on GMSF and the draft delivery plan last year when we went out to consultation. And we've also framed this around some of the aspects of COVID-19 recovery. So again, reflecting that things have changed dramatically over the last 6 months and that we need to make sure that we're building back better in everything that we do around transport to support wider recovery from the pandemic. And we've been working very closely with all 10 local authorities in particular, and other key stakeholders, and we've undertaken a light touch carbon review of the proposed schemes in the document, and we've updated the 3 big investment maps in that plan. And it also sets out our asks of government, so it sets out a clear set of funding and powers asks of central government. And then the third part is what we're calling local implementation plans, and this is seeking to provide more detail on some of our local ambitions and starts to get down into more detail at a local authority level, particularly around neighbourhoods, walking and cycling, and some of our priorities for our local centres. I'll talk about those a bit more in a moment. So if you remember from the draft 5-year delivery plan, we had these 3 big maps. Those have been refreshed, updated, and again, fully aligned with the proposals in the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. The first map are all the things that we're already committed to delivering as Greater Manchester, and some of our partners, so Highways England and Network Rail commitments are on there as well. The second map are all the things that we're looking to bring forward over the next 5 years. We don't necessarily have funding in place for all of those things, but they're interventions that we think are high priorities, that we're looking to develop final business cases and looking to seek funding to deliver them if we don't have funding in place already. So that includes capital investment in our town centres, in our bus network in particular, some local rail tram enhancements, developing our electric vehicle charging network, and of course making rapid progress on delivering our cycling walking B network. And then map 3 are all the things, the bigger, mostly bigger infrastructure improvements that inevitably take longer to develop, fund and deliver, but that we need to make good progress on over the next 5 years. So this is effectively our sort of long-term development programme, but things that we're working on now. So it includes things like bus rapid transit, our proposition around tram train, and also developing local initiatives around HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail. So from the big stuff to the more local level interventions, and we hope that members will see these as a really positive addition to the delivery plan. So there'll be a set of 10 appendices accompanying the delivery plan, which has been developed very closely with each local authority. They are live documents, so they're intended to be refreshed on a regular basis as local priorities develop. And they're very much focused on complementing what's in the delivery plan. So we tried not to kind of repeat what's in the main delivery plan document, but they're very much setting out those local neighbourhood, local centre interventions with a very strong focus on walking and cycling. And they're designed to support the high level ambitions of the plan around carbon and delivering that 50-50 right mix ambition. So there's quite a lot in there. This diagram just gives a bit of a summary of how it all fits together. So you'll see the main strategy document, which sets out kind of our long-term challenges and opportunities, the outcomes we're trying to achieve, our key performance indicators, supported by that 5-year delivery plan, which has those more detailed interventions and priorities and funding requirements, and those 10 local implementation plans supporting that. So we are finalising the approvals on those documents over the next month or so with each of the local authorities, and we'll be taking it through the combined authority, and we'll be looking to publish those documents alongside GMSF. So very happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed. I've got 3 indications so far. Councillor Shilton-Godwin, please, first.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you very much for this report, and thank you for all the work that goes into this. I know that these are weighty questions that affect us all massively. There's 4 questions or points that I wasn't clear about. The first thing I want to say was, a bit like the item on housing, I was a bit disappointed that we actually didn't get the draft of the review to look at in advance, because I did feel that very much the paper we got to look at was telling us that it was going on and about the process, but not really any of the content and not any of the real detail about what was in it. And so for me, that was a disappointment. The second thing I want to ask about is about the targets. Greater Manchester overall. What do you think of the carbon targets? Oh no, it's the targets for modal transport mode, like 50% of journeys going to be either by public transport or by active travel by, I can't remember the certain date. What I wondered was whether or not those 50% targets had already been broken down into, because I'm sure that they will be different in different authorities. We've got very different geographies. We're in different situations in terms of what there already is and how long and how easy it's going to be to deliver those changes. The third thing I wondered about was bus reform. I think we've all been expecting an announcement on the decision made as to how our buses are going to be reshaped in the future, and it's very late in the day, so it would be rather remiss of us not to inquire about it, I think. And the last thing I wanted to say was right at the top of this report, it says about the climate impact, that the intention is to be carbon neutral by 2038, I think it says, yeah, 2038. I know that in Manchester, our intention is to be zero carbon by 2038. That's quite a different thing because of the netting off of carbon emissions. And I wanted to know how much of that carbon is going to be netted off elsewhere, and whether it was going to be netted off within the Greater Manchester conurbation, or whether it was going to be done by some other way, which could be anywhere in the world, really, couldn't it? So I just wanted to know about that. And as a side to that, I am quite bothered that we're not all working to the same carbon targets, and obviously transport is a major part of it. And so I think that is something that we need to work on. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you. Simon, are you going to take that, or Nicola?
Shall I start? Yeah, we're obviously still going through sort of the local scrutiny of the documents and local approvals. So we're very keen to bring you back those detailed documents once they've been through that process. So I think the intention is to come to the next meeting with the full detail. But you should also get an opportunity, within your own local authority as well, to look at those documents, and certainly the local implementation plans are very much there for local authorities to review, scrutinise and approve locally. In terms of the right mix targets, we've broken those down for different sorts of journeys. So we've got, you may have seen that the draft city centre transport strategy has gone out for consultation, for example, and there we've got a really ambitious target, around 90% of all journeys into the city centre being by sustainable modes. And similarly, we've got separate targets for local neighbourhoods, which again go much further in terms of the proportion of those that we want to be made on foot and by bike, recognising that those sort of short trips of under 2 kilometres have great potential for being made by active travel. So there is a breakdown, and I'd be happy to share the detail of that with you, Councillor Shilton-Godwin, if that would be of interest. We have published that breakdown. Simon, I don't know, do you want to pick up on the bus reform question?
Yeah, certainly. So the Combined Authority took a report on the outcome of the consultation that we ran on the case for bus franchise at this meeting in June. And at that meeting, rightly noted that there are changed conditions, as we're all very much aware, as a result of the pandemic, and that it was suitable and appropriate that further work be undertaken by ourselves within Transport for Greater Manchester to review the assessment, which of course was very, very strongly supported through the consultation, prior to then bringing back final advice on the outcome of the consultation for the combined authority to give its advice to the mayor. That work is underway, and we are hopeful that we will have completed that work such that we can bring it back to the combined authority before the end of the calendar year, but I'm not in a position as yet to be able to confirm the timetable for that work.
Thank you. I've got Councillor August next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think I agree with a lot of what Mandy was saying. I'm a little bit perplexed by this report, and I'm really excited by everything that's been said, and I was a little bit disappointed to not see more detail. The report says to comment on the approach being taken, but there's not really much for us to say here. I understand, at the last part of the report it says that it's going to leaders to be reported on the 31st of October, which means it must be published in just a few weeks. So that must mean there must be something for us to see, and if it's not for public consumption, we do have a part 2 to this meeting. It is our job to scrutinise, and I am quite disappointed that we're simply being asked about the approach taken. There's not much to say. I think you've done a great job in how you've thought about changing things, but I don't know how you've actually changed things properly. There's not much for us to say, and it comes back to what a recurring theme in this meeting, really, that we're being shown things, and this isn't particularly to either of you two officers, but we're being shown things that we can't really comment upon. And I do think, if there is an issue with us seeing things before leaders have, then perhaps they should be brought to us after the leaders have seen them for us to comment on and call in decisions and stop things if we don't think they're right. That is how scrutiny works in most councils. I'm unsure as to why it's not working that way at the GMCA. And the sad part is that we're unable to call in decisions once we've talked about them at scrutiny already. So we have them before the leaders see them. We're then told constitutionally we can't call it in because we've already seen it, but we've not seen all the detail properly. It's an awful catch-22. So it's not to you two officers. I think it all sounds very, very exciting. I wish I knew more about it, and I'm sure when you come next I'll have more questions. But it's more a question for this meeting as to whether is this a useful way to use our time? Frankly, I don't think so.
Before you respond to that, can I just apologise for the meeting? I have to leave, unfortunately. Councillor Gibson will take over, and he has a note of those who've indicated their wish to speak thus far. So thank you for your attendance. I'm sorry I've got to leave in the middle of this important item. Councillor Gibson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. We shall see you at the next meeting, and have a good evening. So I think next on the list we've got Councillor Proctor. Sorry, just Simon. Simon or Nicola? Do you want to respond? Sorry, to Councillor August.
I think thank you, Chair. I've heard those points being made very clearly, and I think if I pick up with combined authority colleagues to see how we can most swiftly involve the scrutiny committee in the review of the document, and then advise members further from there.
Thank you, that's great. So Councillor Proctor, you next, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, yeah, from the information I think we've been provided with, I'm happy with the approach that's set out in the report and the delivery plans. From what information we've got, I'm happy at this point, but it's obviously not enough information. Just the question I had was on the developing new forms of transport that's coming through very, very quickly. I mean, the one that's in sort of common information at the moment is on the electric scooters, which is going to have a major impact on on the infrastructure and transport needs of the cities like Manchester and Greater Manchester as well. So I just wondered how much you take that into account in your plans. How do you plan for those kind of things, which currently are at the moment illegal, but people are using them, and likelihood is they're going to come quite a significant transport impact in areas like Greater Manchester in the future. So it's not just those, but other forms of transport as well. Just what I thought, how you include that in the plans and how you try and sort of deal with that for the future needs, because we don't know how it's going to progress in the next few years. Thank you.
Shall I take that one, Simon? Yeah, it's a very good question. We're very lucky to have an innovation team at Transport for Greater Manchester, a small but but very dynamic team that goes out and looks at does a lot of work looking at new modes and new innovations that are coming onto the market, working with partners from across the world as well to understand how some of these things may be working in other cities. So we're actually very well placed to understand new innovations that are coming forward, and we often seek to run trials and pilot some of these things so we can understand what the impact might be before they sort of become more mainstream. So that's the approach we're taking around e-scooters at the moment. You may be aware that the government brought in new legislation in the summer to allow e-scooter rental trials to be run across the country. We are looking to run a trial in Salford. That's likely to be the first one in Greater Manchester, which will be starting soon, and will enable us really to understand some of the benefits, some of the challenges around e-scooters, and how they can work in a place like Greater Manchester. So those kind of pilots are a great opportunity to test the infrastructure, test how you manage some of these things. So, for example, those scooters will have limiters on, which mean that they can only go at a certain speed within certain areas, which helps us again to manage some of the potentially negative impacts on pedestrians. They also make use of cycle infrastructure, so I think they help us to make good use of that cycle infrastructure we're putting in. And they help people to make those short journeys without jumping in their cars. So I think there's a huge range of potential benefits, but they also come, with their challenges as well. So I think by running these really carefully controlled, really carefully evaluated trials, we can understand the impacts, and we can make sure that we bring in the right framework, the right legislation, the right policies around some of these new interventions.
Yeah, and it has a knock-on effect for other forms of transport as well, doesn't it? In buses, there may be less need for buses in the future, so it's an incredibly complicated and difficult thing to actually plan for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the trials will help us to understand some of those issues and work them through because they are likely to come. I would think in the next year or so. Then I would think the legislation will change to enable them more in a more widespread way.
Thanks for that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Devil's advocate again. When you're talking about transport, you must take into account people that can't walk far. They can get on a bus, but they can't get upstairs on a bus. So with the COVID, the way it is at the moment, there's only so many can get on a bus. And once the downstairs is full, people are expected to go upstairs. I'm finding what I've seen in my local area, where you've got elderly trying to get out to do their own shopping, having to get back off a bus. And some people having to wait up to an hour and 2 hours because the buses are full. So that's one issue. The other one is, if you're looking at this with our carbon footprint that we're doing, I live on the top of a hill, but wedged between two motorways. That's the 62 and the 66. Now, when it rains, you want to see my tables, my two garden tables. They are full of muck, and it's got to have come from half of the transport that's going on. So I hope this is working hand in hand with our eco plans we've got for the future. But also, please remember, we will need public transport because there are lots of elderly people that do not use their own cars anymore. Okay, thank you.
So if I answer those questions, and they're really important points, Councillor Robinson. So there's been a community-based communications plan that we've continued to develop through the pandemic as we've learned more and more about the specific needs at different points. And one of the aspects in particular that we're keen to get right through that communications plan is that space is limited on public transport, and we need to look out for each other in order to manage that. Wherever possible, we are using staff to help people through the public transport system, but across a bus system, the sheer diversity of a bus system means that's not always possible. So I think it's a really good observation and something that I'm going to take back into TFGM just to make sure that that's an aspect in particular that we're addressing fully enough through that communications approach. Secondly, with regard to pollution, thank you for giving me a platform. Today is actually National Clean Air Day, and we have launched today an 8-week consultation into the Greater Manchester Clean Air Plan, which of course is all about starting to put us on that next step of the path in Greater Manchester towards addressing emissions issues and local pollution issues. And as you rightly say, road traffic is a big aspect in that regard. So I hope I can encourage anybody who's watching the committee meeting tonight and critically members of the committee to take part in that consultation, which you will find on our Clean Air GM website, and I can perhaps arrange through the Combined Authority team to circulate the relevant details to members of that consultation.
Can I just come back on there, please, Chair? Because I've known Simon for quite a number of years now, because I think I'm one of the last few of the original members of this committee, and I know how much work has gone into some of these documents over the years. So some of the new committee members might be asking, well, I haven't seen this and I haven't seen that, probably because you weren't on the committee when I was, and I've already seen most of the work that's gone on. But we do need for the new committee members to be updated on stuff that I already know about. So and with some of the new, like the what's his name, Councillor Charles Billing, you'll have to excuse me, I've got new glasses on, and Councillor Billing, they do need to be informed of what I probably know about. And it's whether I know it's about not having to go back and repeat all the work that you've already done, but putting it in a format and giving it out to the committee members, maybe separately via an email or something, or through a document that they can read up on the work that's already gone on for a number of years. And that's why we're at this particular stage. And it's just to inform everybody. I know the work that's gone on in this for years. So that's all I've got to say now. I'll shut up.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Councillor Billington, you're next.
Yes, you said in your presentation that you want 50% of all journeys to be walking and cycling. One of the primary reasons why people travel is for commuting to work. And in Tameside, as an example, we have the lowest job density in Greater Manchester, where more people travel out of the borough than into the borough. And that creates problems in itself because it makes us a dormitory commuters town. And I was just wondering, how do you expect people to achieve that 50% of journeys for walking and cycling when people are having to often travel outside of the borough, and cycling is sometimes impossible in some of the more remote satellite areas like in Stalybridge and Mosley and Longdendale because of the topography of the area. So I was just wondering, is there any work being done with local growth teams as well to attract inward investment to bring in jobs into areas around local transport infrastructure, not just for walking and cycling, but to actually get people into our more of the satellite towns like in Tameside, Oldham, Rochdale and Wigan, because I know I think Wigan was only a bit above us in terms of their job density, so they have issues as well, and some places of Wigan are really out in the backwater, because I know because my parents live there. So I was just wondering, is there any work being done on that to try and join things up?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and the We know from the travel diary surveys that we do, we have them sort of going on a rolling basis. We've got a really good understanding of the different sorts of journeys people are making each day. So the 50-50 vision is 50% of trips to be made by walking, cycling and public transport. So the assumption is that the remaining 50% of trips or thereabouts will still need to be made by car. And we recognise that because it is such a diverse and dispersed conurbation, actually, Greater Manchester, that you do have a lot of people who will continue to be reliant on cars, and we recognise that, and we'll need to continue to work on that. I think the one of the aspects of that target is not just about improving the transport connections, but is bringing some of those things that people need to access day to day closer to where people live, and that's where the relationship with the spatial plan is really important, so that people have more services closer to where they live. Might not be their job, but it might be the other things that they access, like shops or schools or day-to-day activities, leisure activities, which are closer to where they live, so they can more easily walk, cycle or use public transport. And it's really important that we understand that relationship between development, regeneration and transport, and we need to plan those things hand in hand if we're going to achieve these targets. So on the face of it, I think some people think we should be going further, but when you actually look at that dispersion of trips across the network, we actually think this is a really challenging set of ambitions, and we're going to have to work really hard to meet that when you start to break it down into the different journeys that people make every day. So we think it's a challenging but a deliverable ambition. And again, we're happy to share some of the detail that sits behind that analysis to show how we think we can achieve that target over this time horizon.
Thank you very much, Nicola and Simon. Just one couple of quick things from me. One is I wondered if you could just clarify one of Councillor Shilton Godwin's questions about net carbon neutrality and net carbon and carbon zero, sorry. And just one comment from me. You said in the report that this was planned to be published with GMSF. We don't need to revisit GMSF at this committee on this occasion. We've talked about it plenty, and I'm sure we will again. But I would just plead that this is such important work that if, for whatever reason, GMSF is delayed further, this isn't delayed with it, and we could try and keep this moving in its own right. But I shall leave that in your capable hands.
And that's noted. But throughout the process, we've been very keen to maintain that circular relationship between transport planning and spatial planning in Greater Manchester. It stood us in great stead as a city region, not only in terms of good planning, but also in terms of the standing that we have with central government, because we hold tight to that discipline. But I hear what you're saying, Councillor Gibson. I'm going to hand over to Nicola, because she's far more of an expert in understanding the differences of carbon than I ever will be.
I was just wondering whether Councillor Shilton Godwin would mind repeating the question, because there were quite a few questions at the beginning of the meeting, so I just want to make sure I'm answering the right question. Sorry.
It's just, yeah, that's fine. I had just noted that the report said that the intention was to be carbon neutral. Now I know that Manchester's climate emergency target is carbon zero. I'm not 100% sure, if I'm honest, about what the GMCA climate emergency target is, but I am a bit bothered that I'm just very concerned that we all get in the same boat and start rowing in the same direction. And if it's things that are set off, where are they being set off is the other thing I really wondered about, Nicola. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, so it's net zero, so over the period to 2038. But one of the things we've been looking at is around our carbon budget. So it's not just about achieving net zero sort of year on year. It's about how can we keep within our carbon budgets. And I think that's one of the challenges, and that means we need to make rapid progress. So this 5-year delivery plan is really critical that we get this right. We make the right decisions about what we're investing in to put us on the right path to that. And that's particularly around investing in walking, cycling, and public transport, and making as much progress as we can over the next 5 years on those modes in particular.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Mandy has very helpfully reminded us that we did agree we would discuss the walking and cycling report that members received as part of this item, as we've got the officers who are expert here with us. So if has anybody else got any questions on the walking and cycling report we received, or should we go straight to Councillor Shilton Godwin?
Am I okay to speak then? Yeah.
Yes, help yourself, sorry.
Okay, so thank you very much. I just want to say thank you very much for that additional report as well. And I don't expect anybody to do a presentation on it. I just had a number of queries, and they do very much relate to what we've just been talking about. There's a section in the cycling, the walking and cycling report that talks about road safety, and I think we've all been probably far more aware than we'd like to be of the of road dangers during lockdown. There's been an awful lot of talk, hasn't there, about how much less traffic there's been this going on. But I have seen graphs which have shown an inverse relationship between the volume of traffic and the speed of it. And certainly, I ride a bike a lot, so I suppose I should declare an issue, a personal interest in although it's not technically a personal interest. I ride a bike a lot, and I have on occasions been really scared on my bike. So my concern is that part of the travel, if we are to really to make progress on this issue, we have to ensure that people feel safe. And at the moment, this is not a priority for Greater Manchester Police. It's not in their priorities at all. It doesn't feature in their reports, barely. There have been massive cuts in that. And I honestly think that until people, when they're driving cars, recklessly really fear that there will be some consequences of that. And I realise this isn't just a Greater Manchester issue, it's a national issue, but I really think it's time that we address that, because until we do address it, people will not feel even as comfortable to cycle. And actually it also affects people walking, because cars are parked all over our pavements. That means that if you've got a disability, or you're elderly, or you've got a pushchair, you've got to walk into the road. It's really not, it's not what happens in civilized places. It's not right. We need to address it. And I'd like to know what conversations are taking place across the silos of police accountability and transport strategy to make that happen. I think it's that integration of purpose that's really important. The only other point I wanted to make was about the key, the KS, oh no, it's not K, the KPIs about the assessment. And Nicola talked earlier on about the travel diaries. There's a real disparity, isn't there, between the travel diaries and how they and the picture that they give about how many people are doing various different activities, given that if somebody gets on a bus or a train or a tram, we know exactly how many people have done that and when they did it and where they went from and to. Whereas with walking and cycling, it's so much less, the information we've got is so much less rich. And that really bothers me in terms of our ability to assess that we have made the changes that we want to, that people are really benefiting from it, to intervene, to really help and support. And I want to know how we intend to address that, because I think it's an old trope, isn't it, about you manage what you measure, but we need to do better, I think. And I'm not, again, like Linda said, I'm not blaming anybody for this. It's just as it is, and we need to improve. Thanks.
So, firstly, to your concerns around road safety are concerns that are shared inside TFGM. For a considerable number of years in Greater Manchester, we had seen a very positive trend in the reduction of the numbers of people who were killed or seriously injured on our roads in Greater Manchester. Regrettably, still with numbers of people, though, being killed and seriously injured on our roads. In the last couple of years, we have seen a tailing off of that reduction, and clearly that's a concern for us. And we're also aware that we've seen, certainly through the last 6 months at times, some examples of erratic driving behaviour around the streets in Greater Manchester. There does still remain a very strong partnership between TFGM, the local highways authorities, Highways England, and the police, both at a tactical and a strategic level, to look at how we are best enforcing and maintaining a strong message around road safety behaviour. But the observation is well made. The police are very stretched in Greater Manchester, and their ability to be able to consistently direct resource with all of the other challenges that they face does remain a real challenge. But I know that this is something that is still treated very seriously within Greater Manchester Police, and at Assistant Chief Constable level there remains a regular dialogue with TFGM. So I can assure members that within the resources that are available to the police, they do continue to work very well with us. The point around KPIs on cycling, again, a very good point. Historically, we've had a limited number of cycle counting equipment across Greater Manchester, and so at times we have had to stretch our interpretation of limited data. Through the programme that we're rolling out, and through the Mayor's Cycling and Walking Fund, there is a good resource that's set aside for a monitoring and evaluation programme. So we are now seeing an increased investment in cycling in the cycle counting equipment as we're rolling the programme out. So as the programme rolls forward, we're going to develop an ever richer understanding of the performance of the different routes that we're putting in place. So we're learning as we're building, I think is the message through the programme.
We are lucky to have those travel diary surveys as well. They're hugely important in understanding the variety of trips people make for all different purposes, and how they make them. So I think that, combined with that improved on the ground monitoring network, will give us a much richer sense of what's happening. I think particularly around walking. Walking is a really challenging one to understand, because the movements are so diverse and quite difficult to. They don't follow a sort of very fixed network. So that's the one we need to do more work around. And as Simon says, there's a lot of planning going into improving that monitoring network, so that we can understand the impact of this major investment that we're putting in at the moment.
Thank you. If you're happy, Councillor Shilton Godwin, I think Councillor Billington has a question on the same topic.
Yeah, I'm happy, thank you.
Great, fantastic. Councillor Billington then.
I thought that was really great what Mandy said about speeding, and it made me think about some of the casework that I've been receiving recently. What powers are there for residents to demand greater traffic calming measures in their areas, and how can they go about getting that? Because when I've been trying to get this through Tameside Council, a lot of it is batted off towards TFGM, and the policy is that there isn't really an intervention there until there's a serious accident, whereas most people, they want to prevent a serious accident in the first place. Thank you.
So certainly my experience of working with all 10 authorities through the programme is that the authorities have been very keen for a large number of the measures that have come forward through the cycling and walking programme to be community led. So a number of the planning exercises and the recent exercise that was undertaken to revise the B-Lines network was community led, and all of that material remains live online as well. So there is the opportunity for community groups to continue to comment on the B-Lines network, and to continue to add in proposals around particular local neighbourhood schemes. So I think we're seeing a a growing attitude across all 10 authorities in that direction, and certainly my expectation would be that if communities are bringing forward schemes to colleagues in local authorities, that they will give them due consideration through that process.
It's worth also working with officers on these local implementation plans, because that's a really good opportunity to set out local ambitions and priorities around exactly those kind of measures. And once they're in a plan, it gives us a much better basis for looking for funding opportunities, or for using existing funding streams and directing them towards those local measures that people are asking for.
Thank you very much. So we've got a comment from Councillor Robinson next.
Thank you, Chair. I'll only be quick. If Simon can go back years ago when we first set up the youth committees, one thing I came to you with was, can you please do a survey on transport to hospitals from local authorities? You should have a report on that somewhere, and I haven't seen anything about it since, because we're talking about, you know, walking and cycling, but if people are ill and need hospital appointments, they're not going to be able to walk or cycle. And the local area from across Bury to Rochdale to Manchester, if you live in one side of Haywood and you've got an appointment in North Manchester and you have to use public transport, it'll be 3 buses there, 3 buses back, and take you 3 hours each way to do that. Now remember, I give you that information years and years ago. Can we have an update on that, please, Sammy? Because that's so important for people that are poorly. Right. And regarding people parking on the pavements, the various ways you can deal with that. You take photographs of the cars that are parked illegally, send them to your local police officers or your community-based officers, and as long as they've got proof, they can do something. But they need the car registration and where they're parked on the pavement. So I always tell everybody where I live, take photographs, but you can't get better proof than that. But also, if you need to, get the local council to send in the car park attendants. They'll soon move them. Thank you.
So, Chair, obviously there's been a very strong focus in recent months, in particular, around making sure that we're safeguarding connectivity through to health facilities. And if the committee would find it helpful, then be more than happy to bring a report back on that.
Thank you. I think that would certainly be of interest to the committee, I'm sure. I know I would be interested. I'm perhaps a little biased with Stepping Hill in my ward, so I'm very interested in hospital connectivity, but I'm sure the rest of the committee would be interested as well. So if there are no further questions or comments on cycling or the transport strategy, I believe we're approving this. Is that correct? And then it's going to the combined authority at the end of the month. So are we all happy to do that?
Move it, Chair. Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm seeing nodding, so that's very positive. I think we can move on. Thank you very much, Simon and Nicola, and we shall see you soon.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
So moving on to item 8, the register of key decisions. Are there any questions or comments on this? I believe we normally move swiftly on. Excellent, thank you very much. And then we've got Joanne talking about the work programme for item 9. So over to you, Joanne, if you're here.
Thanks, Jan. I'm going to pass this to Julie Connor. She's going to talk to members about the work programme because of the comments that have been raised earlier. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne. Thanks, Chair. We've kept the work programme fairly flexible. I think Councillor John Walsh wanted to going through the period that we've been through to make sure the committee could respond quickly. But we've got quite a few requests now from members to start to develop and work up a work programme. And listening to what's been said about timeliness, detail, scrutiny, and that have come out the meeting tonight, I just wanted to suggest that we have an informal work programme development session with you all as members so we can properly respond to what you want to scrutinise, as well as what we know is on the key decision register and needs to come to you through due process. And if members were agreeable to that, you know, we could look at what items you're interested in, where you want to make, you know, maybe do some deep dives, some task groups, that kind of thing. So that's a suggestion for members. If you want to, you know, if you're interested in doing that, we can arrange that during the next few weeks before the next meeting and try and develop a programme that will take us through the next 6 months. Thanks, Chair.
I can agree to that, Chair.
Could I just ask a question on that, Julie? One of the things that I'd like to see is more greater scrutiny of GMSF within this committee. It's always being brushed over, always gets moved. And I think it's about time that the Mayor, Andy Burnham, came to this committee to answer questions from members about what's going on there and the process around that as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Billington. We're due to have the Mayor attend the meeting, the next meeting in November, so we can ask him to speak to that. But I would also say that the spatial framework as a development plan, it's a district decision, so it's a district scrutiny function. It's not to say that we can't have an oversight of process here at this committee, but it's the spatial framework is a decision by all 10 districts.
Correct.
Not the CA, but that's not to say we can't ask him to give some kind of an overview.
Thank you, Julie. Councillor Shilton Godwin has a comment.
I just wanted to say that I thought the idea of an informal meeting to look at what the work programme needs to be for the rest of the municipal year is a really good idea. I just wondered what background documents you'd bring to that in order for people to really have a look at what were the right issues to be discussing. I'm very conscious now, even more than ever, that it's important not to ask people to produce reports for no reason, but you know, when they can make a difference. And I think that means before they've gone to leaders, so that those comments can also go forward. Otherwise, to my mind, it isn't scrutiny. But yes, I really would like. I think that is a great idea. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mandy. I think what we did at the start of this year, and it was unfortunate because not many members could attend, but we set up an informal sort of induction meeting, and we had officers from who covered the various aspects of the terms of reference of the scrutiny committee to go through the sort of main issues that we anticipate will be coming up over the next 12 months to give you a flavour, and then you can choose from that where your interests lie, what you think it's relevant to scrutinise. So if, you know, my thinking would be that if we set up the session, we can do that, so we're not overloading you with information, but give you a taster of what's coming up in the portfolio areas that this committee covers, and then you can decide what you want to prioritise. Alongside that, obviously, we've got the key decision register and those things that we know are going through the CA and ought to come to you, if you want them to. So that's how I'd suggest that we run it, but that it is member led. And as you say, we can try to make sure that it's pre-decision scrutiny in a proper and thorough way.
Can I come back on that, Charles?
Absolutely, yeah.
Thanks. I think that is a great idea, but I would like to see something kind of in writing before, so that I've had time to think about it.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you're just presented with things, you end up feeling that you've been ambushed, don't you? And I hate that. Thanks.
I agree. It's always exciting when you're told the full list of jobs that are available that we can look at. It's perhaps easier if we can see them on a bit of paper and come in with some ideas before we get going. So Councillor August has a comment next.
I don't think, Councillor, have you got your microphone again?
Yeah, I think you're on mute, Councillor August.
Thank you. Sorry, my computer's gone a bit funny. Hopefully you can hear me now. I would like to say, you know, the work programme itself, you know, needs to be relevant, and I appreciate when we had the initial work programme meeting, we agreed it should be flexible due to the pandemic and what was going on. So I'm not too bothered about saying, you know, in 7 months' time we shall discuss X. My point really is that if something is coming up in a month and there are draft documents available, of which there are, you know, the TFGM documents are available in draft form. They have chosen not to share them with us in a part 2, and that is really what I am upset about, really. It is available for us to look at, and they haven't. And what happens is Scrutiny descends into a general Q&A on transport, and with the greatest of respect, if I have a question for TFGM, I can get in touch with them outside of this committee. I don't need to sit here and ask them that. I'm here to scrutinise the reports, and that's really what I want to see. I don't think it needs that much advanced planning. It just needs conversations with officers to agree to get those documents to us and to share them with us. And if they're not publicly available, we can see them in a part 2 offline and fulfil our democratic responsibilities to scrutinise. Otherwise, it's a tick box exercise where we're approving the idea of updating a scheme. You know, I appreciate what Councillor Robinson said before, that, you know, she's been on this committee for a long time, but given that this was a report with talking about brand new changes to something, it doesn't matter if you've been on this committee for 5 years or 5 days. The new changes, nobody knows what they are yet, and we should be told if we're to properly scrutinise them. So I'm happy to take part in a meeting, but I'm not looking to just set out a work plan. I want to change a way in which we do things, in that we have access to the proper documents to look at this. You know, a 2-page briefing note on an update of a strategy that's probably hundreds and hundreds of pages long really isn't acceptable in my view, and that's what I would like to discuss in an offline meeting, more than perhaps particular topics. I think they should still remain relevant, and I don't think that you need to have things 7 months or however long in advance to do that.
Can I come back on that, Chair, please?
Absolutely, Julie.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor August, and I do agree with you. My team and Joanne will make sure, and I think the officers on the call on the meeting today have heard you loud and clear, and we'll challenge back and make sure that we get that. Part of the idea of developing a work programme isn't to tie you down for what you want specifically over the next 7 months. Obviously, it needs to have a degree of flexibility, but it's so that we can try and meet members' areas of interest and plan for that to make sure that we have got the right detail at the time. So maybe a combination of the two things, that we challenge back to officers to make sure they bring enough detail, and we've got an idea from you as members so that your work programme and agenda is member-led rather than just key decision and officer-led, maybe is the right balance.
Thank you, Julie. Are there any other comments? I mean, I think it's clear so far that we're very happy to have an informal meeting to discuss the work programme, and I think we've made ourselves heard over the course of the evening on what we'd like to see. So are we all happy to approve that as the way forward for the work programme? Again, I can see nodding and thumbs up, so that's excellent. So that moves us on then to item 10, date and time of the next meeting. Obviously, we'll have an informal meeting before this, but the next broadcast meeting will be the 12th of November at 6 o'clock. I think we can safely say that'll definitely still be on Microsoft Teams by then. So we shall see you all then. Thank you very much to all of our councillors for attending, and to everybody watching in all of our offices. Thank you very much and good night.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you.
Bye-bye, thank you.